Okay, so let's get started with today's Daf Yomi, which is Daf Zion of Bava Basra, and the Daf is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, Atzal, for the Shuyim, Shmir, for the Chayalim. We're going to start on Vav Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Hanu Bei Trey, there are these two brothers, Rashi says, two brothers, Dahavu Bei Dairi, the Havu Bei Dairi, Chad Have Dairi Live, Chad Have Dairi Titai. They shared a house. One brother got the upstairs, one brother got the downstairs. Itbar Tatai. So the bottom of the house started to sink in. So the person on the bottom had a big problem. He wasn't had a big difficulty getting in. So Amarle Titai Leilai. So the person who was below said to the person who's above, Sav Nivnaya. He says, let's do some renovations here. We have a big problem here. We can't rebuild. We can't live like this. Amrway, the guy on top said, Ana Shapir Ka Tayurna. He says, I have no problem. I'm living good. It's you who've got the problem, sir. So his brother said, hello, good morning, Eric. So we're on the top of 7a, Zayin Amid Aleph. So Amrway is Stare Ana Vivnaya. So the brother who's below said, okay, I'll tear it down, I'll build it, I'll pay for the renovations. Amar Leisli Duchto Amederba. So the guy on top says, no, that's not going to work for me, because if you renovate it, I'll have no place to live in it. So the person below said, Amar Lei, Ana Ogercha Duchta. He said, no problem, I'll rent you another place. Amar Lei Lo Tarachna. He says, no, I don't want to go through the hassle of moving. So the guy below says, "Lo starly." So there's how am I supposed to live like this? The house is sinking in. He says, the guy on top says, don't worry. Shofa kresach va'ol, v'shofa kresach upok. He says, go on your belly and get in, go on your belly to get out. We're basically 7a, 4 lines from the top. So the basic scenario is that the person, if they share a house and the person below is in trouble, the person in the house on above doesn't have to make accommodations for him. But says Rav Chama, and our daf is going to have 4 halachos that Rav, 4 ways in which Rav Chama rules, and this is the first. He says, Bedina kamakev, the guy on top, he doesn't have to give anything by the letter of the law, meaning to say, he says, I don't have to move. It's your problem. And that's only the case when the house, basically the top floor didn't sink, so now it's within 10 tefachim of where the lower floor person was living. But if it was sinking below 10 tefachim, matzi amrei amata miyud reshusa didihu, then the guy below could say, listen, you're in my airspace, because underneath 10 tefachim is where I live. And here, I don't have to let you live there. So Vahani Mili, and also this whole case ruling is the Asnu Gabi Adadi, where they didn't make any conditional clauses, they didn't stipulate anything at the outset of Asnu Gabi Adadi, but if they had made a conditional clause, if this is how they're supposed to live, Sasru Vanu, then they both have to share in the expenses of the demolition and the rebuilding. So Gemara asks a tangential question: if they really do make such a conditional agreement, what's the minimum amount that a person needs to live? And then if there isn't that on one of the floors, we'll force the joint renovation project. So Amar Rabbana Kamed the Rava Mishmei the Marzucha V'Rei the Rav Nachman Amar Mishmei the Rav Nachman Kosish Shaninu, like we learned with respect to the Beis Hamikdash, the first temple, that whose length was 40 and its width was 20 and its height was 30. So therefore, we learned with respect to the Beis Hamikdash that what is the height of a building? Rumo, the height of a building has to be kechatzi arko v'kechatzi rachbo. It has to be half of the length plus half of the width. And if you don't have that anymore, then you force them to do a joint renovation project. Armo Rav Aminochu Lotisu Bebuki Sriki for Rav Nachman. Didn't I already warn you? Don't hang these empty vessels on Rav Nachman. I mean, don't attach mistaken teachings to Rav Nachman. That's not what Rav Nachman said. This is what he said. Hachiyam Rav Nachman ki the diary inchi. No, it means the normal way in which people live. Most people don't live in like a cathedral, which is 30 almost high, which is 45 feet high. I mean, that's like like a museum type of building. So Kididari Inshi Vikama Amaravuna Breder Vishua Kechida Aili Isurisa to Mechuza Vahadar. No, typical is the amount you can bring in a bundle of Mechuza and turn around. You gotta be able to walk into your house with the flowers, turn around like a mensch. That's the height. And that's the typical thing. The typical height, I don't know what our ceilings now, 8 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet ceilings. So that's what it is. Who Gavra? So now we have the next case. Then we have next case. Who Gavra? There was a man. This is the second case of Rav Chama. Who Gavra? The Avu Bani Ashita Achure Kavai Dechavre. So there was a guy. He built a wall, and he was blocking the windows of his friend. So the windows were essential for a view. You want windows, but really more for light. You're darkening my house. You took away my light. I can't read. He says, no problem. What I'll do is I'll close up your window here and I'll build you another window. I'll pop you out another window higher up. So the Gemara says, so he says, the guy who owns the window house says, no, that's no good. You're going to ruin my window. You're going to ruin my wall. He says, that's no problem. I'll destroy your wall until the place of the window, and then I'll build it, and I'll make you a new window higher up. So the guy says, no, I don't want that. He says, I don't want a wall where the bottom is new and the top is old. That's not going to work for me. Or he really says from the bottom is old and from the top is new. I don't want that. Meaning to say, he says, I'll knock it out here and I'll build you up a new one. He says, no, it's going to be a hat. The bottom is old and the top is new. That doesn't work for me. So he says, okay, I'll make you a whole new world. He says, no problem. I'll tear down the whole wall. I'll build you a new wall and I'll put the window in it. So the guy says, I don't like that either. He says, to have one new wall in a house that's all old, that's not going to look good either. It's not going to last. It's not going to work. The engineering won't work. So he says, okay, I'll destroy your whole house. And he said, and you know what I'll do? And I'll build you new windows. Guy says, I still don't want that because when you're destroying that house, where am I going to live? He says, I'll rent you a nice Airbnb for the construction. No, I don't want the pain in the neck to have to move. I'm not interested. No, thank you. So is he allowed to do this? Yeah, he's correct. He doesn't have to. He has his rights. He doesn't have to move. He's not required to move. So this other guy can have his house, and he's not allowed to block his light. And so the Gemara says, first of all, it's so obvious. I know this is exactly the same ruling as the first case where the two brothers were living on two separate floors. So why do we have to repeat it? The Gemara says, no, it's teaching us even though the guy who was complaining that he was blocking his light, he wasn't living there. He was just using it for storage for straw and wood. Nevertheless, he's allowed to stop the person from building a house in such a wall that's such a way that he blocks his light. So now up to the next case. So now we have two rulings of Rav Chama. Both cases so far he's ruled that you don't need, that you're allowed to stop the person from building. Hanu Beitrei, the third case, Ache de Palge Ba'adadi. So there are two brothers who divided up an estate. Chad Matya Aspolida, Chad Matya Tarbitza. One took the mansion, one took the garden. Also, the Matya Tarbitza, Vakabani Ashita Puma Daspuada. The guy who got the garden went and built a wall, and he was building the wall in such a manner that he was blocking the light of the guy who had the mansion. He says, you're making it dark for me. You're stopping my sunlight. So the guy with the garden says, I'm building on my property. Now, in this case, you don't have in the previous case, there was a presumption the guy had been living like that for many years. But here we just both got it at the same time. So you don't have a presumptive status of getting that light. So Rav Chama says, I'm Rav Chama, but he's allowed to build. He said it properly. Why is he allowed to build? How is it different from the following brayso where we learned two brothers who divide up an estate? One of them took a vineyard and one of them took a grain field. So one of them took a vineyard and one of them took a grain field. Yeshlo Baal Kerem Dawad Amos Basada. So he says, then the person who has the vineyard is allowed to. Good morning, Jeff. The person who has the vineyard is allowed to work the 4 cubits into the field of the guy who has the grain. Normally, the case is that when a person who has a vineyard, he's expected to be allowed to work around the 4 cubits because it takes that work. But what we're saying here, when they divided it up, the guy who has the vineyard is going to be allowed to work in the brother who has the vineyard is allowed to work in the field of the brother who's got the grain. Because the assumption is that when they divide up the estate, that's what he gave him, because otherwise you can't use the vineyard. So why don't we say here that when they divide up the estate, he wasn't allowed to build the wall blocking the brother and the mansion's light? That was the terms of the division. So the Gemara says, no, the case is different. There, it was part of the calculations. In the case of the vineyard, it was part of the calculations that he's going to get the garden and he'll get the vineyard plus the 4 cubits into the garden. It's part of the whole division. I'll tell you a story. Remind me after this case in the Gemara. I'll tell you a story. But here, what did they do? Because they weren't. You're going to say here in this case with the garden and the house, they didn't calculate everything. They were talking about fools. The high shakel aspolida, the high shakel tarbitza. That there was that one guy got the mansion and one guy got the garden. But they didn't do a complete calculation. So the Gemara says, no. Yeah, they calculated the materials, but they didn't calculate the sunlight. That wasn't part of the initial division. But we have a different attempt. Why didn't he say to him, at first you promised me I'm getting a mansion, but now you're giving me an andruna, which is a dark house. No, that we already had this in the end of Bava Basra, if you remember. He said, no, I'm giving you a house that's called an asplida, not an actual asplida. We have a similar case. Somewhere base core afar animocha. I'm selling you base core afar, which is a large area. Even though he only gives him a much smaller area, it's a valid sale, because he could say, I didn't mean to sell you a vineyard. I didn't mean to sell you a house on a vineyard. I meant to sell you a house in Martha's vineyard. I mean, the States goes by that name. That's all it means. And indeed, that's the case. Vuhu de miskeri base core, as long as it's called that, or paradise animocha. I'm selling you a paradise, which is an orchard, even though in the end there's no pomegranates, it's a valid sale. He only sold you something that's called a paradise, not an actual paradise. The mystery paradise. Or I'm selling you a karam, a vineyard, even though there's no grapevines, it's valid. He only sold you something that's called a grapevine. The mystery karam, it's called a karama. Where it says, no, that case is different from this case of the brothers. There, the guy who was selling it could claim to the purchaser, I sold you what I promised you I'd sell you, which is something that's called a kerem. But but here he could claim, no, we split it up on the basis that I would live there the way our father was living there. So to say that you didn't promise me a light room is not the way my father was living there. He was living there in a light room, and now you're giving me a dark one. So how do we rule in this case? So Amrulay, at the top of 7b, Amrulay Mar Yanuka, Mar Kashisha, Breder of Chistel or Ravashi. So Mar Yanuka, Mar Kashisha. So there's a lot of commentary on this, that these were two brothers, and they had the same name. So to distinguish them, they called one the younger one the older one. Some say that the Yanuka, which means younger one, was really the older one, because he was born when his father was young. But anyway, there's a big dispute there. That's what Tosfos says. But anyway, Mar Yenuka Mar Kshush Rav Chisda said to Rav Ashi, Nardai Tamayu. So that why do we say in this case he could build it? Because this is what Nardai, how they ruled. Amrav Nachman Amar Shmuel Achan Shachoku Ein Lan Lo Derach Zal Zev Lo Chalono Zal Zev Lo Salomo Zal Zev Lo Masamam Zal Zev. So he said that brothers who divide an estate, they're not entitled automatically to an easement to allow them a passageway or windows or the chalonos is basically to say you're blocking my light, or to allow him to put the ladders to get access to his property, and they're not entitled to the full use of the water. Meaning, say you don't get all the rights that your father had. You don't have an easement. You just get what you get, and that's it. And indeed, the Zarba, and he said, be careful, shalachos kavuos ein. And this is the fixed law, and Rava says yeshan. Rava says they do have the rights. So here in this case, Rav Chama ruled that he was correct. So this was the third ruling of Rav Chama. He said that he's allowed to build a wall, and so that's like this teaching of Nardai. Now we get to the fourth teaching of Rav Chama. There was a contract a note that the orphans had. These were minor orphans, and they said basically these orphans said Reuben owes us $1 million, and the nafika leitavra. Reuben said, "No, I have a receipt that I paid your father back." So Amar Rav Chama agvuye lo magbino. This is the fourth ruling of Rav Chama. They can't collect. They can't collect with that note. Umikra lo karinole, but we don't tear it up either. They can't collect. Agvuye lo magbino. They can't collect the nafaktara because Reuben has a receipt. But mikra lo karinole, but we're not going to rip up the note either. The chigadli yasme, because when the orphans get older, maybe they'll be able to bring a proof on their own, umarile, and they'll get rid of the receipt. So therefore, we're just going to leave it in this status until they're older. So I'm Ravacha Berei Rav Ravina Helchasamai. What's the law? In all four cases, the law is like Rav Chama, levar mitavra, except for this fourth case. So in 3 out of the 4, the law is like Rav Chama. Why? We have a receipt, and we're not going to assume that they're false witnesses. In this case, also it's like laws like Rav Chama, that we don't tear up the document. Because if it really was a good receipt, and then they should have produced it when the orphan's father was alive. And the fact that he didn't, it proves it was forged. But maybe he didn't need to produce it because they didn't make a claim then. So anyway, that's what he says. Okay. I'm gonna tell it after. I'm gonna tell it to you after. I don't want to put it on the YouTube. So now it says the Mishnah, Kofano so of no space shar, Bedelas Lachotzer. So we force him to contribute to the base shar. The base shar was basically like they had like a house right outside the gate. There was a watchman there who watched each courtyard. And what his job was like a gated community. He kept people away from the courtyard. So he forced everybody to contribute to the watchman's house, the security guard's house. Videlas lachatzer, and a door for the courtyard. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. Local chatzeres ruyos l'beis shar. No, he says not all the courtyards are fit to be in the beis shar. Not all the courtyards are appropriate for the beis shar. Meaning you don't force him to contribute to everything. It depends. We force him to pay for the walls of the city, and everybody has to pay. And for the doors and the doorpost of the walls of the city. Rashbag says, not all cities need a wall. How long does it need? Jeff, today's a Tuesday. Okay, fine. Whatever. I'm just saying. I was confused. How many people will be in the city? How long do you have to be in the city? And then today is like, and then it's like you're like the people of the city have to contribute. How long before they start hunting you down for the taxes? You'd basically there's 12 months, and then you got to pay. Kana ba base dira. If he buys a house, He's immediately like the people of the city. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. The base shar mal yusahi means to say that it's a good thing to have a base shar. You mean to say that we force him to pay for the gates because it's a good thing? But what about this story? There was once a pious man, have a regular Eliyahu, that Elijah the prophet used to go every day, Elijah the prophet used to go regularly and talk to him. Ava Beishar, he made a security guard entrance outside his property. The security guard entrance was blocking the poor people from going up and asking and crying out to them for money. And so now he blocked them off from coming. And now Elijah stopped coming. So why do you say everybody has to contribute to the security guard entrance when that's what caused Elijah to stop coming? So Gemara says, okay, it depends where you put the security guard gates. Basically, the Gemara is going to give a series of answers. And the basic point is that if you're still able to hear them crying out, then it's not a problem. So one is on the outside, and Rashi says if the outside of the gate of the courtyard, it's a problem because then the door of the courtyard is locked and the poor person is screaming out, you can't hear. But if it's on the inside, it's a problem. But if it's on the outside, then he could go into it and then he could scream out. So that's the point. If it's on the inside, it's a problem. If it's on the outside, it's not. Both are on the outside. Whether he's allowed access to the guard's booth in order to scream out. If there's a door, he can't get in. Both cases, there's a door. Well, if there's a lock, he could get in or not. If it's locked, then he can't get in. If there's an opening, he can get in. It's not a problem. Or alternatively, is whether or not you can get in, whether the lock is on the outside or the inside. Basically, you have to really know to understand exactly the scenario. You have to understand how their locks worked, how their doors worked. And but the basic point is that if you can't hear the poor man's cries, then you're not supposed to build that type of thing. You have to be able to hear the poor man cry from your house. So now we say, so if no base shar v'del sachatzer, we force everybody to contribute to the security guard's gate for the courtyard. But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said not all courtyards are the same. Tanya Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer lo kol chatzeros ruyos l'beis shar. Not all courtyards are appropriate for the gatehouse. Courtyard that's next to the public domain, that needs a security guard. That if it's not next to the public domain, you don't have to worry about the people coming in, so you don't need a gated community. Nowadays, let me just finish this sentence. The Rabbanan say you always need to do it because you always have to be concerned that people could come in. So basically, there's a balance. What they're saying, there is a security guard concern that you're worried about people walking in, so you have to have security. But it's clear that there's the concern also that you need to be able to hear the cries of the poor at the same time that you're protected. So you need both. So that's the balance. There's security, but also you want to have exposure. So that's the Chashuk Kichemet had a question that there was a people who they lived in a building, and then this is Rabbi Zillerstein, and then they wanted to put in access panel, like buzzers, and then the other people said no, but now the poor people can't get in to ask us for money, so we don't want to put it in. So it's a question of how much of you have to weigh each situation. How much of a security threat is it versus how much is it denying access to the poor? It's obviously a deeper question about our society. Yeah, for sure. That's the balance.
But it's all the time building security.
Yeah.
So we have to improve security. Schools and homes.
Yeah, that's the balance. The balance is being accessible, but also being safe. That's it. So they're dealing with that same question. But Elijah stopped coming. We don't want Elijah to stop coming. So it says we force everybody to contribute for the walls of the city. Here's the next one coming for you. This is right for you, Eric. You'll see this. Shimon Gamliel said, "Local aya rose ru'uyos l'choma." Not all the cities need a wall. A city that's next to the border needs a wall. It's not next to the border. It doesn't need a wall. Rabbanan say no, all the cities need it. Why? Because guess what? Sometimes, even though you're not next to the border, sometimes they're going to draft everybody, and then everybody's going to need a wall. So by Minei Rebbe Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. This is for you, Eric. Kishen Govin, when you collect the money from the people, if you nefashos Govin from each household, you collect by the number of people in each household, or Dilmo if each Shevach Mammon Govin, or you go how much money they have. How do you divide it up? And I'm only if Mammon Govin. No, you basically have you go to see how much money they have. That's how you tax them. Elazar Bani Kava Bamasmaros. He attached nails to this law, meaning it's the law. He could Amri alternatively by Minei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yochanan Kashen Govin Lafi Kirav Batine Govin or Dilma Lafi Mammon Govin. When they collect the money, do you collect more from people who are closer to the wall, closer to the dangerous spot, or according to the amount of money they have? Amalei Lafi Kirav Batine Govin. No, you collect more from the people who are closer. Elazar Bani Kavav Mismaros, and he's put a nail in it. It's the law. Rabbi Yehuda Nisia Rama Deshura Adrabanan. Rabbi Yehuda Nisia put the taxes on the rabbis. This doesn't go over well in the Talmud. Basically, he made the rabbis pay for the wall. So Amar Reish Lakish Rabbanan lo tzuchen etiru. So rabbis don't need protection. The Ksiv Asperem Michol, because it says in the verse in Tehillim 139, Esperem Mechol Yerbun, that I'll count them up and they'll be greater than sand. Esperem Laman, who am I going to count? If you want to say that the righteous people are greater than sand, the whole Jewish people are like the sand that's on the banks of the sea. For sure. The righteous people will not be greater than the sand. They're just a portion of the Jewish people. That's what it means. The actions of the righteous will be are greater than the sand. And it's a logical argument. Just like sand, which is there's not so much sand that protects against the sea. Most of the world is water. And so according to this approach, for sure you shouldn't collect the money from the tzaddikim for the wall. So he says, when it came in front of Rabbi Yochanan, when Reish Lakish came to Rabbi Yochanan said, Reish Lakish was a bandit. Remember, he was a fighter. And he said, no, you don't make them pay. He says, Rabbi Yochanan said, you should have said a different pasuk. My time so this is the Torah scholars from that pasuk. Reish Lakish Savar, he learned it like this: I'm a wall that's Knesset Yisrael. Shaddai Migdalos, that refers to Bate Knesset Bate Midrashos. But it doesn't apply anymore. The commentaries say because this refers to people whose Torah, they never wasted a second of their Torah study, never wasted a second on anything. We'll see some stories about this later on. That there was such intense focus, but the minute you don't have that intense focus, then you have certain breaks, you have certain tax breaks for clergy, but you don't have this blanket exemption. Okay, I'll tell everybody a story from yesterday. I'm just gonna stop the recording. Basically, maybe Jeff remembers this. So what happened?